This is the newest addition to my one tile per episode series, Fort Francia Bay, but we are still continuing the downtown special, so we are just building smaller parts instead of filling one whole tile completely. Don't worry, after we filled these 6 city center tiles, we'll be proceeding like usual. I'm Imperatur and you're watching me building the transition zone from skyscrapers to medium to low density developments. That's always a pretty difficult task and hard to get it right, so I show you how to manage that. We are also building the central bus terminal right next to the main station, and all that you'll see is in the classic Imperator speed build style. The build time was roughly 4 hours with a few crashes again. I think I figured out the cause and we'll talk about that later in the video. This episode is sponsored by the one and only legend Bare Necessities. Thank you so much for your unreal support to the channel. In this video, I wanted to create a transition zone from the lower buildings on the right hand side to the downtown core with all the tallest skyscrapers. This will also be next to the rail corridor we built in the last episode and is initially a narrower strip of 2 to 3 blocks. As already mentioned, I will design the 6 unlocked tiles from the last video in smaller episodes to achieve the perfect result for our city center. I start by laying out the road network. This will consist of a wider street where the tram runs in the middle of the street and serves the neighborhood with local public transit, but also continues further into the outer districts of the city. The streetcar network won't be so huge because the main part of the public transportation will be provided by the metro. So at the beginning we also had to create a transition that leads from the 2 levels in front of the main station to just 1 level, because we don't have these 2 levels or the separation of pedestrians and car traffic in the whole city. That would be a bit overkill in my opinion. That area here is also pretty flat, but I tried to integrate some more interesting terrain around the downtown too. After that, I'm also preparing the lot for the bus terminal. I've raised the terrain here and demarcated it with these wider footpaths and the retaining walls. Then I'll also add shop fronts to the concrete wall so that you can go into grocery stores or cafes, for example, at street level. This raised plaza is technically still part of the station, so to speak, and then leads downstairs directly to the city's main bus terminal. It's not particularly big, but I think it serves its purpose. There won't be that many bus lines as most of the area is covered by the metro anyway, which also has a relatively high station density here in the city center, as some of you have already pointed out, but in the outskirts the distances between the stations will of course be greater. As an example, I can mention the Chicago Loop, where you can really see the individual stations, even from other stations. There probably won't be a loop around the city center, although I would have loved to build one. The geography is simply not suitable enough for that, and with the large station. Now in the center, we already have a main transportation hub that generously supplies the city center with good public transit. We also won't really have surface parking here, but lots of bigger parking garages instead. I designed the plaza here in the same look as in the last episode, with these red brick surfaces, but also the concrete accents in between and just a few planters and trees to make everything look a bit greener. The stairs with the horizontal pillars are of course not functional, but I put invisible footpaths over them, so that people can still reach the lower level via these stairs. They're not quite on the same scale as the Sims, but you can't get much finer than that, and it doesn't look too bad from a distance. It's actually strange how we don't have stairs in the game, cause they are such an integral part of cities with a bit more challenging terrain. Chapter 2 is about the bus station, which I'm building here in this trapezoidal lot. To do this, I designed small single-lane roads with sidewalks on both sides where the stops with some covers will later be. I also used the road builder mod to build roads without sidewalks where the buses can then enter the station and the public roads around the terminal respectively. The platforms can then be reached via crosswalks at the same level. At first I thought about building pedestrian bridges for this, but that just wouldn't have fitted in here, and I think this design is relatively simple, but it serves its purpose and we can already see how the Sims walk along here. When I created the first bus lines, they were already relatively well used. You can't really see that in the cinematics because there was never a bus passing by and I was too lazy to wait for it for ages, but you can trust me in that regard. It's like in CS1 that only buses get a really good usage, but not any other mode of public transit, especially not trains. That's a real bummer. As you can see, I used these taxicab stands and bus stop roofs, which I think I found with the static service buildings mod and find it. They give the whole bus station a much better look, and so it actually looks like a station and not only a smaller bus stop. Then I also placed two stops, one behind the other on the three longer roads where buses come from right to left, and only one on the 4th street where buses drive in the opposite direction. I hope that the design is not too confusing. At first I wanted to use 2-lane roads so that buses could overtake buses that had just stopped, but that wouldn't have worked here in terms of space, so the schedule has to be timed so that they can leave one after the other, or they simply have to wait, which doesn't allow for super long wait times, unfortunately. I then finished the areas with concrete surfaces so that you can really see a defined area where the bus station is. I also laid the red brick surfaces over the crosswalks so that it is indicated where pedestrians should and shouldn't be. Then I will also place a few lines so that people in their cars can see that they are not allowed to drive in there, but that it is only intended for buses, and with a few decals later the whole terminal looks really cool in my opinion. Or what do you think? This has to be one of the dumbest things that exists in the game. Why do walls and fences have different colors and you can't somehow change them afterwards? Especially with fences, this makes no sense at all. That definitely needs to be fixed, that you can change the colors afterwards, or they just make 4 different walls instead of 1, so you can choose the color directly. But this way it's just super annoying, and I easily spent 10 minutes just putting these 6 boundaries here so that people can't accidentally fall into the other bus lane. It's just a bit safer, because we once had an incident in our town where school children were also standing on a central platform like this at a school, and a child was pushed onto the road and then hit by a garbage truck passing by. This ended fatally, of course, and a few months later fences were placed at pretty much all tram stations where there are roads behind the station platform, so hopefully this will never happen again. It's so cool to see all the Sims walking along, because that's what I've always wanted, a lively cityscape. It was probably just due to the density of buildings in the rest of the city that I haven't experienced it yet, because with skyscrapers that have around 300 to 400 employees or even residents, there are of course a lot of Sims on the move. Unfortunately, this also has a huge impact on performance, and I've noticed that my game always crashes when I have the game speed on the 3rd level and pan my camera camera too quickly. That's kind of the main reason why I try to avoid speeding up the game too much. That's why zoning is no option at all for me, because I don't want to wait 10 minutes for a building to grow that I don't even like in the end. There are probably other reasons as well, because quite a few other people experience exactly the same thing, that the game just crashes for no reason and doesn't even display an error message. That's why it's super important to just have autosave in there, so you don't lose all your game progress every time. You can set it to 5 or 10 minutes and unlimited saves, but don't forget to go into your save game folder from time to time to delete some of the autosave files, because they can also get quite large. In the last and longest chapter, we try to create a transition between the high-rise buildings in the city center and the lower buildings on the outside of the city center. To achieve this, we are trying to lower the density or the building height steadily and in a flow, so to speak, so that the high-rises slowly become more stringent. This district will have a high density, and that was also very important to me, to get a good mix of tall buildings but also medium density ones, to get that fade from high to low. In the end, it's actually not just more. It's really not all that detailed, but took a really long time anyway, as it's quite hard to get the perfect mix of buildings that looks good from all angles. For me, it's also really important that the skyline feels organic and beautiful from every direction. For the houses, I mainly used a mix of tall office buildings, a few signature buildings, but North American and some European commercial buildings, and mixed-use buildings to get those jobs in. I also placed quite a few elementary schools, as I have a real shortage of elementary schools in the city. To the right, as we slowly faded out, we also used lower residential buildings, but also buildings from the urban promenades pack to get newer buildings in the middle of the mix. I could imagine that there used to be surface parking lots on the side of the new buildings, but the neighborhood then got densified and also gentrified a bit. I've also indicated an empty plot here, which I've simply designed with various earth and sand surfaces and a fence around it. Such areas can often be found near railroad tracks, and I could imagine that newer buildings will also be built here in the future. You get a bit of depth and history with areas like this in your city build, as it suggests that the city is not yet fully developed, but that there will still be construction sites where things can be built in the future, like in the lot right over the street. There's not much to say about the rest, as I'll just keep placing buildings to get this mix of higher and lower buildings. And after this episode, our unemployment rate, which has been a problem for several videos, is at a realistic level of around 10%, which is okay. That's why I'm still trying to build commercial and office buildings rather than residential buildings. Another tip for a higher building variation is to use the static buildings mod to take buildings of the same type and lower them into the ground, so that you get these terrace gradations, like in New York for example. That always looks quite cool and just gives the building a more interesting shape rather than it just being squarish. Very cool that you stuck around to the end and watched me build the next part of our ever-growing metropolis, Fort Francia Bay. I'm definitely really pleased with how everything turned out. Here we can see the before and after, and I think the downtown takes more and more shape with every new episode. How everything will develop and how big the skyline will get, you'll see in future episodes. So stay tuned and subscribe not to miss any of the next videos. Maybe I inspired you to build and detail a downtown area too. Who knows? Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, you can give the video a like. If you want to support me further, you can visit my Patreon site. There you will find a save game for every episode, and with this addition the city has definitely become a bit more amazing and bigger. You are very welcome to explore everything yourself down to the last detail. But don't forget to download all the mods I use. The mod list is also available there, as well as my graphic settings. And we can also chat a bit and have a nice time, of course. I would like to thank all the people who have already decided to support me on Patreon so much. But can we reach 500 active patrons in the next few weeks? There are only 30 missing. That would be absolutely amazing and another big milestone. Your support over there makes videos like this on such a regular basis even possible, so if you want to see more, you know what to do. But now I say, see you for the next episode when we'll continue with the next tile until we fill out the complete map, so please give a like if you support the project. Have a nice day and ciao ciao for now.